Okay, let's get right into it. We finally got the first iteration of our playoff rankings from the committee. Let's take a look at what the committee gave us. This is what the committee gave us here as we sit with Georgia #1. Everyone knew that that was going to happen. No one knew what was going to happen from like 2 down to about 9. They came out with Alabama at #2. I'm sure everyone was curious about that. We'll get into it a little bit. Michigan State 3, Oregon at #4, and then Ohio State just ahead of Cincinnati as the first 2 out. It was Michigan at 7. It was Oklahoma at 8, Wake Forest at 9. So that's what the committee gave us. Interesting. Let's look at what I would have done. If I was a committee of 1, this is how I would have ranked the teams. This would be my playoff today. And it's different than the way I would rank teams who I think would win this week. I do it much more on what do these teams deserve versus some subjective metric like 4 best. Georgia would be #1. That's pretty clear. I think Michigan State in that win, what they were able to do last week against Michigan. Oklahoma is an undefeated. And then Oregon, with the single best win in the country so far, would overcome the 1 loss just ahead of Cincinnati, Alabama at #6, and Ohio State at #7. So very different. These are vastly different lists. My playoff as a committee of 1 versus what the 13-person committee gave us. So let's dive into it. Okay, so folks, there's a lot of people up in arms today about the committee's rankings. And I know I took a few shots in a sarcastic way at the committee and have done so over the last few years. But I think we need to start with this fact. Okay, first and foremost, the playoff as it's currently constructed is broken, okay? But it was never really right to begin with. So it's not right to say it's broken. It was just never correct in the first place. What was never correct about the playoff? Well, I think it's pretty simple. One is 4 teams is too few teams. Everything in our sport now is defined by whether you're in the playoff or not. That's the only way you can define yourself as successful. Well, that's not good for our sport because it doesn't allow for growth. It doesn't allow for a school or a program to evolve. So we've shoved too much meaning inside of just these 4 teams. It's too narrow of a scope in a large sport like college football. So that's #1 of why it's broken or maybe never right to begin with. I don't think that the committee as it's currently constructed is the right way to rank teams. 13 people in a room talking with one another is not anywhere near what you would want to do if you were trying to get a data set that was unbiased. Okay, so I think that we need to expand the current committee to have more variables, or we have more committees, because we need to dilute the power of the committee and we need to allow for wild variations or bias to be thrown out. Anybody that has taken a statistics course or dealt with any math course would tell you that you want to take kind of the high and the low and you throw them out and you want to get to the fat part of the bell curve. Well, we don't do that with a 13-person committee. You can have wild biases that lead to rankings like this. Georgia 1 and Alabama #2, even with a loss ahead of all these undefeated teams below them. So that's a problem. The last thing that is a problem is kind of how I derived my list versus how the committee derived theirs. They're trying to seek the 4 best teams. How subjective is that? It's completely subjective. That is no way to rank teams. You have to honor what these kids and players and coaches are doing on the field. You've got to honor that. So I think you should always be putting a list together like this so that it's the 4 most deserving teams. I think that's better than a list that is the 4 best teams, which is what the committee is going to give us over here. Highly subjective, in particular with a team like Alabama at #2. So that's #1. I think that the system that we have in college football is broken. So it's not necessarily the committee's fault for what they give us. That's the bad hand that they were dealt, and they're trying to make the best out of that bad hand. That's #1. I've got 4 points here. This is #2. The committee devalues the actual game on the field. We play college football for the games. This is why we go to college football games. This is why we love it. This is why when you went to school, you felt like you were a part of the program. It's because you would sing the fight song. You would be at the game and you would watch your team compete with a scoreboard at one end, with a clock at that end as well, and you would say there's going to be a winner and there's a loser, and that's going to define which team is better moving forward. Well, that doesn't happen anymore, because we've totally devalued the games. And I think that that's bad for the sport. I don't think that that's very good for us moving forward. What's the evidence of that? Well, the evidence of that is that Alabama, with one loss, is the second-ranked team in the country. You've got Oregon with a loss as the fourth-ranked team in the country. Ohio State as number 5, but Cincinnati's undefeated at 8-0. Why does it matter what Alabama's ranking is? Well, it matters a great deal. And the reason is because they, of the teams that have a loss here up in the top of the playoff rankings, have what I would consider to be a bad loss. Oregon has a bad loss, a far worse loss than Ohio State or Michigan or even Notre Dame. So you're suggesting that it pays to lose to a lesser opponent than a better opponent. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Think of it this way. If Texas A&M had somehow beat Mississippi State and they also had a loss and were jockeying for position up here, then all of a sudden the head-to-head would matter because A&M would be a little bit better. So then Alabama would have to be behind A&M, similar to how Ohio State has to be behind Oregon. But since A&M is worse, Bama gets to just rise up the rankings. So it actually paid dividends for Alabama that A&M has struggled to a point where they've got 2 losses and are not a similar team to Alabama. How does that make any sense? So the structure of the playoff is broken. The committee is not honoring the actual games on the field, and they're giving us 2 different standards of proof. And I think this is a big one, folks, and just bear with me because it takes a little bit of time to get through this one. We have 2 different standards of proof in college football. If you're a blue blood, like Alabama or Ohio State, you're going to get the benefit of the doubt. In our country right now, we've got 2 different standards of proof. We've got a criminal case and we've got a civil case. In a criminal case, you've got to be found guilty beyond the shadow of a doubt. In a civil case, it's just the, quote, preponderance of the evidence. So basically like a majority decision. All right? It's got to be more likely than not that whatever happened or you were accused of happened and you can be found guilty. Well, we've got 2 different standards of proof in college football. If you're Alabama, you don't have to prove on the field that you're better than a bunch of teams because we just think and expect that you're better than other teams. Meanwhile, Cincinnati, boy, your standard of proof is way up there. I mean, way up there. We care about who you played and where you played. It doesn't matter that Alabama only has 1 win against a currently ranked team. No. It doesn't matter, Cincinnati, that you went to Notre Dame and you beat an Irish team that hadn't lost in that building since 2017. No, because we have 2 different standards of proof. That doesn't work in college football, folks. Why are we saying, Cincinnati, you've got to prove beyond a shadow of doubt? You've got to prove beyond all doubt that you're better than Alabama. But now Alabama, it's more likely than not that you're better than Cincinnati, so we're just going to go in that direction. I think that is a problem. And folks, the last thing that I would say is that this standard of best versus deserving is not where we should be. Trying to find the 4 best teams, folks, it's very difficult. The committee's got a difficult task. This is not good for college football. We need to reward what kids are doing on the field, and we don't tend to do that because of this standard of best versus most deserving. I think that we need to change that. The only way to change this and wrestle this grizzly bear to the ground is through expansion. And I understand that we're just going to continue to argue when we have expansion, but at least we can fix some of the structure, like how many committee members we have and how many committees we have. Can we get to the fat part of the bell curve? Can we get to a point where we've got more teams that actually control their own destiny? Think about it right now, folks. We've only got 3 teams in actuality that control their own destiny. That's a problem. That's a problem. Everyone's saying like, hey, don't worry, if you're Oklahoma or Wake Forest or any number of these teams, like you went out and you'll be fine. No. Guys, folks, factually, only 3 teams actually control their own destiny. There's 3 teams in the country that we can say, if you win out, you're going to be in. Georgia is one of them. Alabama is clearly one of them. Michigan State. If Oregon wins out, we don't know what they're going to do with Ohio State. We don't. We have no idea what they're going to do as far as the value goes. Cincinnati, clearly, it doesn't matter if they went out. Oklahoma, matters what happens elsewhere. When there's only 3 teams that control their own destiny, you're disenfranchising fan bases all over the country. You want to keep Cincinnati's fan base engaged. saying, hey, every single game is a playoff game for you from here on out. If you win that conference, you'll clearly be one of the 6 best conference champions, let's say in a 12-team playoff, and you'll go to the playoff. And guess what? If you win your conference and you're one of those 6 best champions, you'll host a playoff game. That's college football, folks. That would be better. This structure, this subjective nature, this is not it. This is not it. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoy that clip, make sure you click subscribe somewhere down here. From game highlights to exclusive interviews and rankings, we've got everything you need as a college football fan right here, College Football on Fox.